In just 5 minutes, we will start today's first forum. We welcome you to join us at the center stage. Thank you. InnoVEX 大会论坛预告，在5分钟之后，中庭的 Center Stage 即将进行亚洲矽谷国际观点论坛。今天邀请了来自美国、欧洲、日本、新加坡的创业家以及投资人，分享他们的创业实战经验。在5分钟之后，我们的论坛即将开始。现在欢迎所有的贵宾来到 Center Stage 加入我们。5G is leading the way to smarter cities. We are leading the way to 5G.
Before you dream it, prototype it, kill it, rebuild it, optimize it, and realize it. It starts with Qualcomm. 5G will drive big ideas. We're driving 5G.
Taiwan has proven itself historically to be a strong global player in hardware manufacturing, sharing many #1 spots in the global IT market. Silicon Valley and Taiwan have already been loyal business partners for decades. The creation of the Asia Silicon Valley Plan intends to build on that relationship. This plan aims to embed the spirit of Silicon Valley and its relaxed regulations to foster an innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. The Asia Silicon Valley Plan will dedicate 10 billion NT dollars to fund startups and 100 billion NT dollars to support enterprises. IoT is the high-speed train to the future. Taiwan's IoT Grand Alliance, thousands of R&D clusters, manufacturing, and startups form the foundation for this initiative. With profound Asian cultural insights and brilliant local talent, Taiwan is ready to serve as a powerful engine to the IoT industry and contribute to create a beautiful life today and for the future.
InnoVEX 大会论坛预告，来自主舞台，我们马上要进行的是今天的第一场精彩论坛。我们邀请到了来自世界各地的创投以及创业家来到现场，分享他们的创业实战经验。我们欢迎现场所有的贵宾，赶紧来到 Center Stage， 来到主舞台，加入这场精彩的论坛。谢谢大家。Ladies and gentlemen, this is an announcement from the Center Stage. In just a few minutes, we're going to start today's first forum, bring you a global perspective on startup ecosystem. We welcome you to join us at the center stage. Thank you. Audience watching online, good morning and welcome to InnoVEX 2019. I'm your host, Sophia Chow. If you're new to InnoVEX, let me quickly tell you what InnoVEX is. InnoVEX is more than just an exhibition. It is an international platform for startups to showcase their innovative products, services, to be seen and further assisted by accelerators, and most importantly, to meet potential partners, customers, and investors. In the 3-day events, there are a lot of forums, matchmakings, demos, and pitch contests. Today is day 3, and I want to kick off today's forum by welcoming a special guest to do an opening remark for us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Paul Lee, CAO of Asia Silicon Valley Development Agency. Paul, please. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul Lee, the CEO of ASVDA, the Asia Silicon Valley Development Agency. I'm very honored to participate in InnoVEX 2019, which is a very important event and an annual festival for Taiwan's startups. To optimize Taiwan's startup and entrepreneurship ecosystem, NDC and SVDA support InnoVEX in recent years, hoping to prospect startup and entrepreneurship in Taiwan. And InnoVEX entering its 4th edition has increased the scale from 217 exhibitors in 2016, the first year, to 467 this year. And it's our pleasure to share this honor. Asia Silicon Valley Development Agency, as the name suggested, was exactly established to connect Taiwan, Asia, and Silicon Valley. We learned the business mode of startup and entrepreneurship from Silicon Valley in the United States, but we will adjust our ways. It depends on different circumstances. Moreover, we need to expand our horizons and learn development trends from different regions and the whole world besides Silicon Valley and Taiwan. Therefore, this year, it's our honor to co-organize InnoVEX Forum and invite 4 overseas experts who have a long-term engagement in the startup sector within their countries, just like the France, Japan, the United States, and Singapore. From global perspectives, they will discuss different option modes of startup and entrepreneurship, developmental trends, important issues, and so on. As a national project, ASVDA hopes to provide more new international information for our startups and entrepreneurship to promote them into the global market. Once again, thank you for coming, Mr. Jeff and Mr. Masashi Sato, Mr. Deb Ng, and Mr. Laurent Guade. Today, we also invite the former CIO of ASVDA and the General Manager of Taiwania Capital, David Wong, to be our host. And he and the 4 speakers are specialists of startup, have lots of experience about venture capital and understand the different startup ecosystems. I believe we will learn a lot from them. Last but not least, thank you for your participation. I wish you great success on today's forum and the beginning of a beneficial friendship. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are a startup owner or you plan to start your own business, this is a forum you don't want to miss. This morning, we have invited experts from the United States, from Japan, from Singapore, from France, to share with us their view on startup ecosystem and to bring you a global perspective. Let's start from the first keynote speaker. He is from Harvard University, United States, and he's also a mentor at MIT. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me and welcome Professor Jeff Carr. Professor, please take the stage.
Great. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. So my institution requires that I disclose my conflicts of interest, of which I have many. I've started several companies that cover many different areas in the life sciences. I hold equity in these companies and am an active consultant. And my laboratory really focuses not on just publishing papers, but on trying to develop new technologies that we can then bring to patients in the shortest time possible. And today I wanted to share with you one story where there's a direct connection with Taiwan, which is the story of Frequency Therapeutics. Several years ago, we were very interested in stem cell therapies. Stem cell therapies end up being incredibly promising, but they're also very complicated. This idea of taking cells out of the body, manipulating them, and then putting them back in the body. And we started thinking that maybe there's an easier way to do this, something that would be much simpler. And so we started to think that could we use standard drugs to activate stem cells and progenitor cells in the body, and then control those cells towards druggable tissue regeneration. And we know that there's examples in nature of regeneration that happen throughout life. For example, worms can regrow several body parts. Lizards, you can cut off a tail or a limb and they'll regrow it. So a question that we looked at first was, where in the human body do we have the greatest regenerative potential? And we really focused in on the intestine because the lining of our intestine regenerates every 4 to 5 days completely throughout life. And what really mediates that process is a cell here on the base of the crypt. So if you look at our intestines, you have the villi and then you have crypts. So it looks like this. And the stem cells are in the base of these crypts. And those stem cells are turning over every single day for your life. Your life actually depends on these cells, which then form the entire lining of the intestine so that you could absorb nutrients and also act as a barrier towards pathogens. And if you look at these cells, so they exist here at the base of the crypts, they form many, many important cell types in the body that can secrete antimicrobials, that can create a barrier like mucus, but then can also absorb nutrients. And when we started this work, we looked at the biology, but the challenge was that there was a lot of groups that were looking at developing these organoid structures. So you can actually take tissue out of the body, and you can form these organoids which resemble the crypt villus structure. And so we took a close look at that, and what we noticed is that these organoids were useful to grow, but very few of these cells were the stem cells. And we really needed to study these stem cells in order to enable this druggable tissue regeneration process. And so this was really the big challenge in this project. The idea was if we could unlock the ability to deliver drugs into the body and control stem cells, that could open up completely new therapeutic areas for medicine. Now, just to understand a little bit of the biology, which is important here, and I promise I won't get into too much biology, but these stem cells exist in these crypts, and they sit next to another cell, which essentially controls them. That cell is called the Pannis cell. So it touches the stem cell, and it controls the stem cell. If the stem cell moves away from that Pannis cell, then it differentiates. It becomes a mature cell type in the body, and it can no longer renew. And so what we did is we studied this process, these interactions, and we looked at how is that signaling occurring? How is that second cell type signaling to the stem cell to keep it turning over and over and maintaining it in a stem cell state? And so through understanding that, we were able to figure out the pathways that these cells were communicating to each other, and then find small molecules that could essentially replace that second cell type. And so what we did is we went for something like this, where you have very, very few stem cells, to a situation like this, where we add our small molecules and we can generate tons and tons of stem cells, unlimited supply. So this was in the laboratory conditions. We showed that we could take just standard drugs and control these stem cells. And so this was the work of Xiaolei Yin in my laboratory. And this led to a publication where we essentially showed that we could grow tons of these cells, and it unlocked the ability to form all of these really important cell types in the body, in the laboratory. And so we started in the intestine. We were very interested in stem cell therapy. We wanted to create a very simplified approach where we're not delivering cells, we're actually just delivering standard drugs. So we figured out some pathways in the intestine, but then we stepped back and we asked the question, where in human medicine will this have the greatest potential for societal impact? And we went to the ear. And you might be thinking, well, how did we go from the intestine to the ear? And the reason is that hearing loss is one of the greatest societal challenges where there's absolutely no drugs available. And everybody suffers hearing loss because it's associated with age, but you can also get hearing loss from very loud noises, and then certain drugs that are used in medicine can cause death of the hair cells in the inner ear, which then can lead to loss of hearing. And the World Health Organization estimates that there's over 1 billion people on the planet right now with hearing loss. You can get hearing aids, which can amplify the signal, and then there's cochlear implants, but these are suboptimal approaches. We really need better ways of treating patients who have hearing loss. And it goes beyond just hearing in conversations. Hearing loss can lead to all sorts of other issues, social isolation. It's been linked to dementia, and so hearing loss is not just a single problem. It actually leads to all kinds of other challenges. So it's really important that we, with aging population, that we figure out a way to restore hearing. And so what happens is everybody is born with hair cells in their inner ear. And these hair cells, you have a layer, one line here of inner hair cells, and then you have 3 rows of outer hair cells. And when you're exposed to noise, it actually kills these hair cells. You only have 15,000 per inner ear that you're born with, and they never, ever regenerate throughout life. These cells are not, it's not real hair. It's actually the sound waves hit these antennae, essentially, little projections from the cell, and they move, and then the cell converts that to an electrical signal that then gets sent to the brain so you can hear. So if these cells die, then you lose your hearing. It goes away permanently. And we know that when we look at the biology of hearing loss, we know that we have progenitor cells or stem cells that will remain throughout life. So you have cells in your inner ear which can form new hair cells, but they never divide. They're not active. They're dormant. And if we discovered a way to activate these stem cells, then we might be able to restore hearing, which could have huge benefits for humanity. And so we were inspired by nature because in nature, we have birds and amphibians like frogs and toads, which can regenerate their hearing throughout life. But us humans, we lose that ability as soon as we're born. And so what we did is we took the molecules that we had tried in the intestine, the stem cell that exists there, we realized had very similar properties to the stem cell in the inner ear, these progenitor cells that could form hair cells. So we tried our molecules from the intestine in the inner ear, and lo and behold, we were able to create tons and tons of hair cells in culture, on the order of 70-fold greater than what anyone had ever demonstrated before. So essentially, these molecules that we discovered in the intestine worked in the inner ear to form new hair cells, and the hair cells are critical for our hearing. And so we were able, this is just showing an example of these hair cells, and the pink here are these hair cell bundles that are essentially these, the hairs, the antennae that can respond to the sound waves. And so we were able to show, not only could we create these hair cells in culture, but they had all of the machinery to sense and transmit signals to the brain. And we're also able to show, which I'll show you here, that when we did in one experiment, we induced injury to these hair cells, we were able to functionally restore them with these small molecules. So we started this company called Frequency Therapeutics. The company was formed in 2015. We have myself and Bob Langer as the academic co-founders of this company. David Lucchino is the CEO, Chris Luce, the CSO, and Will McLean is one of the world-leading experts in hair cell biology. And so we started the company in 2015. Taiwania here in Taiwan was one of our lead investors in a recent round. And there's several angel investors here in Taiwan that contributed to various rounds of funding. We were able, by having a very focused approach, we were able to enter clinical trials in Australia in 2017. So we did an initial safety study. And we just completed a phase 1/2 trial in the United States. And the idea here would be you take these molecules and you can inject them into the middle ear, and then the molecules can diffuse into the inner ear where you have these progenitor cells where you want to restore the hair cells. This is a 5 or 10 minute, it's a very quick procedure in an ENT office. And these molecules we were able to show could go all the way from the base to the apex of the cochlea. And so I want to just spend a moment on this trial. So we conducted this safety trial. It was a randomized placebo-controlled trial, a phase 1/2 trial that was led in the United States. And just 1 month ago, we released some of the data to describe, and this was a safety trial. It wasn't designed to measure efficacy, but we actually, in this trial, showed that we could functionally restore hearing in patients who had stable hearing loss for months and months. So this is really incredibly encouraging to be able to show that we started from the basic biology, understanding how to manipulate these stem cells and progenitor cells in the intestine to move it to the ear, and then to show it in animal models, and then move actually into humans and show that we have a very strong, robust signal of functionally restoring hearing in patients. And this is a platform technology. So we started in the inner ear, and we believe that we can apply this to many other tissues in the body. The company, David Lucchino, and Chris Luce, I formed the company with them in 2015. They assembled a very experienced team to lead the company with decades and decades of pharma experience. And here is we have a very experienced board of directors. And you'll see here we have, actually if I just go back here, Michael Hyung is from Taiwania Capital, sits on our board as well. We have a very strong clinical advisory board as well, which we meet regularly with to go through the clinical trial data. And then we have a regenerative medicine advisory board. And really, one of the critical things here, I feel, about bringing innovation from the laboratory to the clinic, one of the critical things to consider is that there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of things that you miss along the way that you can't see because you're so focused. And so it's important to have a very diverse, critical scientific advisory board who can identify holes. And the people on our board are some of the most critical minds around in the stem cell regenerative medicine area. And so I just want to close by stating that I'm really excited to be here. This is just one example of academic innovation that we formed a company on. We've moved to clinical trials. We have very promising results, and we continue to push this forward. And we're very grateful to Taiwania Capital and a bunch of angel investors that are here based in Taiwan. I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And next, we're going to have a look at the Japanese startup ecosystem. Our next speaker is the senior manager of Nomura Research Institute. NRI has been assisting startups for more than 10 years. And today we have Mr. Masashi Sato to share with us his expertise. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sato.
你好. Thank you very much for your attention, and great thanks to TCA and ASVDA for having me here at InnoVEX. I'm very pleased to be here today. Today I'm talking about Japanese startup ecosystem and open innovation. So just briefly, this is who I am. As being on top of being an NRI consultant, I wear double hat. I'm also active as a CEO and co-founder of the Space Tide Foundation. This is a nonprofit being active, supporting space startups and to form a space business ecosystem in Japan, as well as Asian-wide. And I also joined the government committee to discuss how we can foster Japanese startup ecosystem. OK, so these are the kind of very typical Japanese pictures. So what is your take on Japan? So many people may think about Mount Fuji, sushi, or whatever. So it might be a little bit too like an old stereotype. People nowadays may think about robots, anime, cosplay, or other like accurate infrastructure like transportation, like bullet trains. But here's my question. So is Japan actually creating new value to the global society? Although all of the previous things might be just valuable for Japanese people or Japanese fans, are we creating new values? That's my question here. So this is actually a fact. Are we still thriving? So from those kind of statistics, in terms of GDP, our country has been enjoying our second position as a global giant from late 80s to the early 2000s. However, after that period, we've been kind of struggling with other emerging countries, and we are no longer one of the giants in the global economy. Therefore, in terms of global competitiveness, year by year, we are kind of declining in that competition. When we look at the Japanese larger corporations, in the past 30 years from now, 60% to 70% of the top 30 companies grow in global-wide were covered by Japanese companies. However, nowadays, among those top 30 companies, Japanese companies are only 1 or 2. We're declining. And as you can see here, if you pick top 10 Japanese enterprises, they cannot well compete with the today's world giants like Qualcomm. And if you look at R&Ds, I'm proud of the fact that Japan has been leading science and technologies as one of the science leaders in the globe. However, if you talk about their achievement for the social impact, I mean, this sense, social impact means money and economic value. As you can see from this diagram, their achievements is kind of doubtful. So we've been spending a lot of money to science and technology, but in terms of making innovation for society, we're not being really efficient in that sense. And this happens. 3 years ago, Taiwanese giant Honhai from Foxconn purchased Sharp. Sharp has been one of the giant leading manufacturers in the past. Many Japanese may thought this is a very negative story for our society. I've been talking too many negative stories about my country, but I'm a Japanese. I don't want to vilify the country where I was born and raised. And personally, I think this Sharp case was not necessarily the negative thing. On top of that, we can think in the controversial way. This is really important for our society to think about. We have to go on to the open innovation, to be much more flexible, to make something new, change from the past. So now, Japan is really avid for a growing new economy. However, since it's been commonly said, we cannot expect larger enterprises to be much flexible and going forward at a rapid pace. Rather than that, we need much more new players. That's why Japan has started creating new startups from making a great new economy ecosystem. So this is the statistics about investment to new startups, as well as VC's investment for the startups. So as you can see here, the number of startups invested by the funders has been growing after 2013. So as you may know, we had a tragic event in 2011. Tsunami hit our homeland. And after that, many people started thinking about making a new society for our country. So this is our very good tipping point for us to make a new value for our society. And also, if you look at the money invested to startups, the number is also growing. Today, startups become one of our common standard in our economy. Like 6 to 7 years ago, startups were still kind of considered to be a real risky thing to choose as their young people's career. However, nowadays, young people, especially from new graduates from top universities, tend to choose startups as one of their alternatives. So startups are competing in the sense of alternative career with consulting firms, investment bank, bureaucrats. Startups is one of the options. And luckily, we had a couple numbers of exit cases. So these are the notable startups. Now, most of them are IPO in the open to market. And today, I personally use news picks from this online media startup, UzObase, reading their articles, or sometimes I even post as a business writer to those media. And I just ordered my business card on Rusk Soul Service platform for my business Space Startup Foundation. And my wife is a fanatic of buying and selling her products and clothes and baby toys at the Mercury's online e-commerce platform. So these kind of startups has actually embedded in our daily life. They are actually changing our social society. So we also are expecting future unicorns. So these are the top 10 future promising unicorns that we are waiting for the next IPOs. Believe it or not, unlike other Western countries, now Japan is very unique that IPO is much more standard than acquisition in terms of exit. And AI company like Preferred Networks is being really expected to be a giant in the future. They're actually invested by Toyota. And in terms of startup ecosystem, when you look at Tokyo, as many of you know, Japan is kind of centralized country, and Tokyo has everything. So this is all the same for the startup ecosystem. Tokyo has money, players, government, everything. But even in one city as a Tokyo, we have different regions of startup towns. So like other towns in the world, it's very fun to see that the West has hip culture, young people, and cool things. So that's why startups born in the West area deal with gaming, media tech, or ad tech, those kind of cool stuff. On the other hand, in the East, where the governmental districts are located, and also we have Emperor Palace there, so the startups there deal with a kind of very different thing, stiffer and much more serious things, like fintech, blockchain, or life science. I'm really enjoying this kind of differences. And if you go look back, again, to the investment money by a type of investor, this is, I think, one of the greatest unique things of Japanese startup ecosystem. So as you can see here, we don't have a large number of independent VCs. Like Silicon Valley, if you look at them, they have numbers of independent VCs, like Bessemer or Sequoia Capital or others. Singapore has been really active inviting global renowned investors to the country. However, Japan is still in the first stage of the startup ecosystem. So that's why we don't have a large number of independent investors. On the other hand, the current leader of the startup investors are companies, especially in the non-financial sector. So let's look at who they are. So as you can see here, these are the leading investors in our country. So some of these players are maybe the companies you already know, like Toyota, Honda, Sony, or SoftBank. They have their own side brand as an investor, so as a venture capital. We call these companies CVC, corporate venture capitals. So CVCs are the leading bodies of Japanese startup ecosystem for finance. And of course, we do have independent VC and the government and university bodies, but they're still kind of growing compared to CVCs. And if you discuss startup ecosystem, the government is also one of the greatest important players. And in our country, the government takes the lead. The Prime Minister Abe, the current Prime Minister, has flown to Silicon Valley with his delegates and had been really impressed about this ecosystem out there. Since then, he started taking his initiative to grow our own ecosystem in our country. So this Venture Challenge 2020 is led by Prime Minister by himself, involving all kinds of government players as well as commercial players. Their aim on this platform is to create new startups which could be really active in the global market, unlike the companies of us were used to be. And they're planning to host a very large startup event next year called Global Venture Summit 2020 in Tokyo. This will be one of the greatest startup events like Computex. So let's take a look at digging more into what kind of startups exist in our Japanese startup society. So this is a glance of the Japanese society and the market as a whole. So we do have a few challenges and opportunities to think about. So one of the most important challenges we are faced with is that our population is declining. It is estimated in the 2050s, 40% of our population will be over 65. And the size of population will be growing 70% from current status. So in that sense, you can easily imagine that we will be losing the labor force participation rate. So we do need to have more labor force. People may think about this as a really negative aspect of Japan. However, we do think in converse way. So we have to think about this as a really good tipping point, that we have to invest in technology to overcome this situation. In this context, as our technological background historically has a huge strength in life science, biotech, or automation, like Honda or Toyota has been growing, we need to make good use of this technology to overcome those social problems. And this is how the Japanese startups has been engaged in. So this is a landscape of Japanese startups as a whole. Of course, crowdsourcing, web apps, those kind of stuff are the core as a number of the startups. But you can also see that health tech is in the second position. So they are one of the key players of our social problems solver. And also, we do have AI deep learning startups, as well as IoT. They're also really taking important roles to be engaged in this social problem. I'm introducing a little about very unique Japanese startups here. I picked 4 startups. The first one is iSpace. This is a lunar exploration startup. The unique point of this is that they're backed by the government. They raised $100 million fund by different players, but most of them is funded by the quasi-government investment banks. This is very unique in Japanese society. And the following startups on the bottom, Melton, they are actually developing a real-time human motion mirroring robot based on the technology of AR, VR, as well as haptic technology. So this will enable people in elderly or people have physical problems to work on labor, physical labor. This is really effective to solve our social problems regarding population. And on the right corner, you can see Will. They are one of the rockstar startups in Japanese ecosystem. They are developing really cool and fancy IoT wheelchair. So this is also a great solver of our problem. And interestingly, they are actually manufacturing this wheelchair here in Taiwan. And the last one is W. This is a really funny startup. And as you can see, they're making a detector, putting on your belly, and actually it's monitoring what's going on in your bowel and bladder. And I'm reluctant to say, but it actually lets you know when is the exact timing of your urine or feces. But this is very important for elderly people or their care managers or family with their babies. This is really important. And that's why Foxconn are investing to this company. And another thing in the ecosystem is the word open innovation is becoming a really booming word in our society. As Professor Chesbrough from UC Berkeley says, there are different segments and definitions of open innovation. Open innovation contains different meanings in this. However, in Japanese startup ecosystem, it is defined in only one meaning. Everybody in Japan uses this term as a collaboration, partnership between larger enterprises and startups. And as I said, larger enterprises have been investing in startups really proactively so far. However, that is not the only thing they are doing. They're also seeking for a potential partner really energetically. And every single large enterprises has been building their own department, so-called Open Innovation Lab, Digital Innovation Lab, or something like that. And what they're doing there is hosting accelerating programs or matchmaking events, that kind of things, to figure out who's going to be a good partner for them. And like companies like Toyota, Honda, or other manufacturers are doing pretty well on this. However, we have just begun this activity just 2 to 3 years ago. So we are still in the first stage of this momentum. So many of the larger enterprises are still seeking for partners. And we haven't met with the breakthrough cases yet. So we are really doors opened for many players, startups, but the companies are still searching for. So here's our challenge, how we can make up good cases. So this is summary. I don't want to talk each of those. And just to wrap up, finally, the Japanese corporations has been eventually pretty much inward mindset. And it is commonly said from the foreign people that Japanese people are a little bit too close-minded, very hesitant to talk with foreign people. But as I said earlier, we have to change. And we've been very active to open our doors to startups as well as foreign players. So here in Taiwan, I hope to have really good future chances that I believe that we can make a good partnership between Japan and Taiwan, wherever, whenever, or between whoever. So sometimes Taiwanese startups make a good partnership with Japanese corporations, or vice versa. Japanese startups may be supported by the Taiwanese larger corporations. This is one of my dreams. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Sato. Thank you, sir. Usually when VC or angels are assessing a startup company, one of the very important criteria is to see if the startup company has the potential to enter global market. And next, let's shift our focus to the Southeast Asia market. This is a growing market and continues to draw more and more attentions from not just startups, but also investors. And now please join me and welcome our next keynote speaker, Mr. Dave Ng. He is the head of Southeast Asia, 8 Roads Ventures. Dave, please.
Thank you.
Let's welcome Dave.
Thank you, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's very nice to have all of you here today, and obviously there's a lot of interest here on technology. So maybe a little bit of an introduction of myself. So I am Malaysian, and my mom is actually Taiwanese, but I grew up in Malaysia, and went to the US for my undergrad education at Carnegie Mellon. So did computer engineering undergrad and grad over there, and subsequently, once I finished school, I went out to Silicon Valley and worked for almost 15 years, so spent close to 20 years in total in the US prior to moving back to Southeast Asia. So when we talk about startups and tech ecosystem, a lot of people always think about, naturally, right, is Silicon Valley, right, US, and then subsequently, ecosystem like China and other, mature markets like Europe or even Japan. Comes up often. So in my session, I'm going to talk more about Southeast Asia. I'm going to talk about what's happening and what are the interesting, exciting things, and what are also some of the challenges, and therefore opportunity to work together. But before I start, I just want to introduce 8 Roads Ventures a little bit. So we are a global venture capital fund and platform for entrepreneurs. In fact, we have been investing for more than 25 years. We are actually part of Fidelity International. We are a financial venture capital that has global footprint, started in the US, and our first market out of the US is actually China. So we are in China more than 20 years ago. And then subsequently, we launched our expansion into India, Europe, Japan, and then now Southeast Asia. Some of our earliest investment has been in Alibaba. So we are actually one of the earliest investors there. And then also companies like WuXi Pharma Tech, And then iStudies, which is a cloud SaaS company in the US, and then many more. So Southeast Asia, very often people talk about Southeast Asia, and the first thing that comes to your mind, are normally travel destination, right? Some fancy, exotic location, whether in some island destination in Bali, Indonesia, or Phuket, Thailand, right? Or sunny Singapore, right? I think that is the common impression that people has. But if you look at Southeast Asia, it's actually a pretty large and fast-growing market. If you look at the broad, high-level macro, right? It's actually a region of 650 people, a rising middle class, right? GDP are growing very fast. Currently, in the most recent survey done by World Bank, the entire region GDP is at 2.3 trillion, which is bigger than India, bigger than Brazil, and bigger than Russia, right? So, therefore, it really presents a very interesting opportunity just from a macro perspective. And then if we dive a little bit deeper, right, just to give you some sense in terms of numbers, how they stack up, how they compare, you can see that it's really a region that has a fast-growing middle class. And when we dive down a little bit, right, we look at how has the middle class been growing, what is the size of the working age population. These are all indicators that points to a market that is coming up in terms of spending power. You have a young, growing population, that's hungry, that's eager to do more, and as they get wealthier and wealthier, they have more money to spend, and they want to consume more, right? And for Southeast Asia, many of the consumers are going online the first time, right? So this is very true in some of the more emerging markets like Philippines, like Indonesia, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia. Many of them are going online the very first time, and the mode of them going online is actually through the mobile phone, right? So as smartphone or smart feature phones become cheaper and cheaper, many people are going online the first time, and the first thing they know from a user interaction perspective is really through a mobile interface. So the expectation, how they expect a website or an app to load everything, the user experience, the ease of use is all from a very mobile perspective. So in a way, we say, it's actually a very mobile-first kind of expectation and interaction. And therefore, when you look at startups in Southeast Asia, increasingly, many of them has taken a very mobile-first approach to trying to tackle some of the largest problem over there. This is just some numbers to basically show that if you look at and you continue to project in terms of how fast the mobile population is growing in Southeast Asia, essentially it will be projected to be the third largest globally after China and India. And as a tech and startup ecosystem, Southeast Asia really has undergone, what I call several cycles and waves of innovation, right? So if you look at, what is really there before the 1990s, a lot of focus across Southeast Asia is really in manufacturing and production, right? So this happens in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and up till the 90s. The thought back then among all these countries and government is to really, shift away from agricultural, shift away from just purely doing primary industry, whether it is, agricultural farming or cash crops, palm oil, rubber. Those are the traditional staple of, a lot of the economies in Southeast Asia. So during the 80s, during the 90s, is a heavy shift of, moving out of that, going into industrialization, setting up manufacturing technology, setting up production technology. So that has been the focus. And then when we get to, somewhere from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, what I call the second wave, it is really about moving up the value chain. It is really about moving from manufacturing and production, going into information technology, going into the early days of internet. So that is the period of time you see, the kind of innovation that comes out of Southeast Asia along the line of, companies like Creative Technologies. I'm not sure how many people here remember Creative Technologies. In the 90s, in the 2000s, they were, a major manufacturer of sound cards, right? Sound cards that back then, you still install in your PC. Which nowadays has already been miniaturized and just be part of your overall circuit board. But back then, these are the kind of technology that's happening in Southeast Asia. Catcher Group, Job Street, is really the early days of iteration of internet economy, right? So the capability there is really more informational. You search for a job online. You try to look for content and news and media online. So that's what Catcher was doing, and that's what JobStreet is doing. And then now, where Southeast Asia is really at is what I call, the third wave of evolution, right? So it is really about Web 2.0. And this whole movement started somewhat, around 2010 and onwards, as people are increasingly mobile, new technology, underlying technology emerge. You see some of the new innovation that comes up in Southeast Asia is along that line, right? So these are some of the companies now in Southeast Asia, right? I think Grab, which is a ride-hailing company similar to what Uber is doing globally, is one of the prime example. There's a company like Aku that basically, does financing to end user who is like shopping online. So when you buy something on an e-commerce website, say you buy a computer or a mobile phone, and at the point of checking out, startups like Aku will offer you a lending, right, to finance the product of the purchase of the product, and this is based on credit scoring algorithms and all that's happening on their platform to be able to make that decision. And then you have a company like Ninja Van, right, that's trying to solve the challenge of last mile e-commerce delivery in Southeast Asia. These are all very real problems. Very often, these problems are taken for granted in first world country like the US, right? You buy something on Amazon, you would have expected the parcel to magically appear in your front door, right, within a day or two. But in Southeast Asia, all this infrastructural enablement, it doesn't exist, right? And of course, the current unicorns like Lazada, Tokopedia, Razer, they're all about e-commerce, they're all about gaming and all that. So that kind of gives you a sense on where people are spending time on, right? What are entrepreneurs doing in Southeast Asia? What are they trying to solve? Where's the current focus? And I'll talk a little bit on what are emerging and what is what people are shifting towards to. But today, trying to essentially solve what I call a uniquely Southeast Asia problem is still very much the focus, right? So think of, for example, in countries like the UK or US, right? ATM machines, right? Your bank ATM machines, which is almost everywhere. That has existed since the late 60s and the 70s and onwards, right? So those kind of infrastructure, those were the technology that was brand new back in the 70s, empowering banking, consumer banking, and was, put out into the market, distributed all over, let's say, United States. And as a consumer, as an end consumer, you have the convenience of just going, coming out from your house, within a 5-block radius, whether it's by driving or by walking, you have access to multiple ATM machines, and you have access to cash. And therefore, you are able to consume and make purchases. But in Southeast Asia, for example, the availability of ATM machines could still be very scarce, right? Very little, especially in rural areas, in remote areas, in countries like Indonesia or Philippines where it's very distributed. This kind of basic infrastructure is still lacking. So if you're a tech entrepreneur, right, and you're trying to solve a payments and access to cash problem, right, it's a large problem. It is a large opportunity that you can tackle. What do you do, right? Are you in 2019 going to go around and try to raise funds and put ATM machines all over the country? No, right? This is something that was done almost 50 years ago, right? So then we kind of see, what we call like a leapfrogging phenomenon, right? Similar to what happened in China, where people go online, right? People think of how to make use of mobile technology, how to make use of new hybrid distribution points to solve the problem, right? So you see a lot of entrepreneurs then innovating along the line of, for example, mobile payment, mobile wallet, right? To allow digital transaction to happen. So this is what we are seeing a lot in Southeast Asia, essentially trying to solve a lot of what we call unique problem, but problem that's large enough, right, from a market perspective that could attract, venture capital to come in to back them, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like the next Google or, the next, Microsoft or Apple out of Southeast Asia. But if there's a large enough market problem and technology could solve that, the entrepreneur is up to something and doing something interesting. So just to give you some example, right? On the left is what is still existing today, right, in the market. And on the right is what entrepreneurs are trying to do, right? So the first example is, if you look at the top left-hand side, the picture there, right? That is a very typical grocery store in Indonesia or in Philippines or in rural Malaysia, right, in Thailand. And you can see how, fundamental, how rudimentary it is, right? It's not tech-enabled, it's cash-only, limited supply, limited goods, and ability to serve the community is very limited, localized. And now, with technology, what are people trying to do, right? They are basically trying to create a smart kiosk, right? So instead of having a totally traditional mom-and-pop grocery store, people are setting up what they call smart technology-enabled store, right? That can be deployed. That you can help to enable a small trader and make it more efficient, right? By using technology. And what this do is, it basically allow any trader, and by the way, this is a startup called Warung Pintar in Indonesia. And what it does is, it allows any small store owner to sign up with them, get access and help to put in the technology. And with that, Warung Pintar is now creating an online network of distribution across the country, providing small business software to the business owner, helping them to run their business more efficient, and then also to help them to aggregate supply chain on the back end, right? So now imagine when you start aggregating thousands, hundreds of thousands of little mom and pop store, and through the platform, you help them to group buy and source all the products. All these small traders get their products for cheaper, and with all the data and with all the information, they are able to better predict when they need to restock, what are the popular items for the particular store. And that helps to basically improve a lot of efficiency in the supply chain and in the logistics and so forth. Second example is, is just give you an example how bad the road and logistics network could be in Southeast Asia. And on the right-hand side is a tech-enabled last-mile logistics company called Ninja Van that's trying to solve the problem, right? So Ninja Van in 4 years, slightly less than 4 years, has become a regional market leader for last-mile e-commerce delivery, basically fulfilling the dreams of every consumer to be able to buy online and get the parcel delivered to your door, right? Regardless of where you are in Southeast Asia. You could be in Phuket Island, you could be in some remote area. They have built up a very, very wide and extensive network enabled by technology, automated routing, dynamic rerouting, all these things that they put in to help to do that, right? And finally, the last example is about, I think, what's popular in Singapore, right? I mean, if you've been to Singapore, hawker centers are everywhere, right? I think that is a great effort by the government back in the early days, in the 60s and the 70s and in the 80s, in a way to help to aggregate locally, food, right? Access to food for the community. And what you see nowadays is, people, company like Grain, launching an online platform, making availability to on-demand, instant availability, instant capability to buy and select the food that you like. And they have a healthy spin, right? That they tend to offer healthy food, and that's kind of like the healthy spin on health, right? So these are just a few examples. There are many, many examples that from Southeast Asia that shows what the entrepreneurs are doing. But essentially, they are trying to use technology to solve a lot of market problems, to build up infrastructure, to build up a lot of backbones that's needed for a digital economy. And my view is that's going to continue to be the focus for the next couple of years to come. But that being said, right, there are also companies like Garuda Robotics that's doing drone technologies that can be deployed, whether in plantations or in mines or in a telco infrastructure network to basically do inspection, do visual recognition, and all that, right? So there are companies that are dabbling in deep tech, dabbling in enterprise technology, but those are more in the early days in Southeast Asia. Now, it's always very easy to underestimate Southeast Asia, right? I mean, very often you'll hear that, large market opportunity, easy to enter Singapore, set up your headquarters and do business. But in reality, Southeast Asia is still 10 countries, right? That means you are going to be dealing with 10 governments. You're going to be dealing with very diverse culture. The way of doing things, the way of life is different across every single country. And different country has different level of maturity in terms of business, and different level of ease of doing business, right? So, for investors or entrepreneurs here who are interested to enter the Southeast Asia market, this is still something that should be put in mind. The best is to form partnership with people who understand the market and go in together, right? And increasingly, we see a lot of cross-border collaboration from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, China, going to Southeast Asia. So finally, I'll leave you with this slide. We are still really early. It's really early days in the tech ecosystem, right? But you see, increasingly, there's a lot of venture fund that's been coming in. Some of them are homegrown. Some of them are homegrown local regional funds, and then some are global venture fund like us. Coming into the market to basically see what we can do together to grow the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much. Okay, now that we have heard from 3 speakers who just shared with us their precious insights and gave us a brief look at the USA market and the Japanese market and the Southeast Asian market. Next, I would like to gather these international experts and bring you a global perspective. Next, we're going to have a panel discussion, and let me first invite our moderator to the stage. Please welcome Mr. David Won, CEO of Taiwania Capital. Good morning, sir.
Well, first of all, I'd like to give thanks to all the wonderful speakers from US, Boston area, Jeff, and also from Japan and from Malaysia. And I think it's a wonderful time for us to share different experience in different regions and also different technology practice. So I'd like to invite all the panelists to come up to the stage so we can have a conversation or sharing together. Yeah, please. Oh, we also have the French, sorry. Coming up. Hey, Jeff. Thank you. Hey, Dave. Good to see you. Yeah, we are going to talk about how to connecting the dots. And from your presentation, I hear a lot of the keywords: global, partnership, ecosystem, connecting. And that's exactly what we are going to do from this panel. Well, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is David Wen from Taiwan Capital. I used to be the ASVD CIO as well. And the purpose of Silicon Valley initiative is also try to connect Taiwan to the global ecosystem as well. And for Taiwan, I know we already have some partnership, in different regions, and I'm looking forward to another area as well. And Taiwan Capital is the government-sponsored venture capital, and we like to, through investment, to leverage our investment from globally to bring the technology and the talent and be able to create an ecosystem with Taiwan industry emerging technology development. And first of all, I would like to start with Jeff. Jeff, you and I think I listened to your presentation, and also a couple of days, thank you for coming all the way from Boston to Taiwan annual conference. And I would like to ask you, since you are from the Boston area, there are a lot of exciting, technology developer and also a great university research institute. I would like to ask you, how can we work closely, not just with Taiwan, but with the Taiwan startup or even the venture society to create more close relationship?
Thank you. No, it's a great question, and I think that a lot of the innovation, as you pointed out, in Boston has its roots within academia, and in fact, if you go back a number of decades, Kendall Square, which is really the heart of innovation in Boston, which is in Cambridge, right beside Boston, started when Biogen was founded in the 70s and 80s with Phil Sharp and Wally Gilbert and others. I think that, it really had its roots within academia, within MIT and other institutions. And I think, it's important to consider that innovation in many ways starts from academia and then kind of spreads outwards. In Boston, we have, I think, one of the greatest densities of academic institutions and hospitals in the world, and yet, still in Boston, there's a lot of inefficiencies in terms of connecting people together and then connecting globally. But I think that really the catalyst was the formation of Biogen, and then that really showed other academics and inspired them how to innovate, and then other companies started coming to that area and growing. I think one of the ways to kind of fuel this type of innovation in other areas in the world and have more connections to Boston would be to connect academic centers in other parts of the world to the academic centers, let's say in Boston or other areas of the U.S. where you really have some of the leading researchers, in those areas. So I think, it's important to share students, to send students over who will then come back so you can fund students. I think it's important to bring entrepreneurs, to fund them to come here and expose them to the culture. I think one really critical thing to consider as well is to really think about, what are the strengths within Taiwan or in other areas of the world where companies that are forming, let's say in the Boston area or other places in the US, could then leverage those strengths. One example is like clinical trials in Australia. There's incredible tax breaks, and so a lot of companies are moving to Australia to conduct their clinical trials, even though they could do them in the US. So I think it's important to identify strengths and then also have cross-fertilization within academia.
Yes, thank you. I know that you have so many successful startups in the pipeline as well, and congratulations to Frequency. And I'm looking forward to have a more closer relationship in that part. And I would like to switch to Masashi-san. Yeah, yep. I think I hear your open innovation, and I'm very interested, which is to connect all the startups. And we also have some connection with Japan startup and also venture capital. And I'd like to hear about, how can Taiwan and Japan, the startup and also the venture capital, have more closer relationship. What's your suggestion?
Right. Thank you. I think one of the things that Japan will be faced with is that, as I said in my previous presentation, the larger enterprises are seeking for good partners, global-wide. And because of the historical background, they're pretty much inward, and they have been knowing about the Japanese startups, but they want to seek for the partners in the foreign countries. So the remarkable case is that Toyota has been started investing in other countries. Like recently, they just released it, that they have invested to China, mainland China company of AI. And that kind of made things to be much more popular among Japanese larger enterprises. And then one of the challenges of that thing we have had is that because of Japanese larger enterprises are a little bit kind of reluctant and hesitant to talk with foreign players, as many of you have experienced before. And then if we want to overcome this situation, we want to kind of have a mutual interactions. So many times, Japanese people go to foreign countries to talk with foreign players. But the vice versa, we also want to have foreign people to come over to Japan and talk with larger enterprises and who have power. And because of the sizes of many of the Japanese companies are really big, although they're not competitive right now, but historically we have had a lot of major corporations, and their decision-making process is really lengthy. So you want to know much about how the Japanese companies are working with. So I want Taiwanese people or startups to come over to Japan and talk with them to know each other much deeper.
Sure, I know corporate venture has been very popular in Japan. Actually, also very popular in Silicon Valley as well. In Taiwan, we are trying to invite more large enterprise to do the investment together. But also, Taiwan has a couple of the portfolio company already have a good, relation or partnership with with Japanese corporate, especially the enterprise. So I'm looking forward to more collaboration as well. Yeah. So we're going back to Laurent from the La French, Taiwan. Because you didn't present, I'll give you more time to, talk a little bit more about the French.
That's very nice. Actually, I will make my keynote presentation here at 1 p.m. So for the one who want to deep insight into the French ecosystem, come back at 1 p.m. My name is Laurent. I represent La French Tech Taiwan. I used to work at the French office in Taipei for almost 3 years. And we established with some French entrepreneur a non-profit platform to bridge French and Taiwanese startup and to enhance the business and knowledge between our two regions. It's very interesting the two topics you just discussed about involving more academia and between each other. I think that there is such a boom of digital startups, software, mobile apps, system for the industry. I think now there is a lot of VCs and companies, so it's like a balanced ecosystem. I think we're now shifting back to our roots. It's more deep technology, which is actually a term who comes from Boston. And France is now very focusing more on deep technologies and really will rise from the academia, from researcher like Jeff. For open innovation, I think that France is maybe a bit unique in Europe. Our large companies very early focused on startup. I mean, very early, maybe 15 years ago. So there is plenty of challenges, plenty of open innovation lab in all our big corporate. So they are very close to the startup world. And I was at Vivatech 10 days ago. And Vivatech concept is like InnoVEX, except that each booth, it's a booth of a big corporate. And within the booth, they exhibit their startups. So it's to show you how mature are the French company working with startup. However, they have the same problem like any big corporate. Once they engage with the startups they're interested in, how do they use the technology? How they implement this technology, their own technology in a system? Should they continue to invest in? Should we break the company, take the technologies? It's still a difficulty for most corporate today, large corporate.
Okay, well, thank you. We also have some meeting with the French in the Taiwan Tech arena, and we also looking forward for more, collaboration. Hey, Dave. I'm also David, so I like your name.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, and I hear a lot, Southeast Asia is a large emerging market. And I know that a lot of innovation also happening there. I just want to see how can we have to have more involvement in terms of startup, community go there, or the venture capital doing the partnership with Southeast Asia region.
Yeah, no, definitely, and just given my affinity to Taiwan, I call myself half a Taiwanese. I always, I've been spending, since growing up, I've been coming to Taiwan almost every year, and increasingly, I think there is more and more exchange between, the Taiwanese startup ecosystem and investor with Southeast Asia. So, for example, in Taiwan, there are a couple of some of the venture funds, like Cherubic Venture, and they have been indicating that they want to increase collaboration with Southeast Asia. There is folks like Mox Accelerator that does a lot of that program as well, and increasingly we are seeing founders from Taiwan visiting Southeast Asia, going to Indonesia, going to Singapore, going to Malaysia, and having that exchange, participating in, meeting investors, participating in tech conferences to exchange that, have that conversation. From my perspective, I think Taiwan has been leading, especially in the semiconductor, the hardware sector, right? And a lot of the Taiwanese giant tech companies that you have today, whether it's Asus, whether it's Foxconn, or TSMC, all these companies took many years to establish themselves, and then now they are the market leader, global market leader. But I think what is falling behind is investment into new areas, investment into software, investment into internet, investment into AI, and which when I come to Taiwan, when I come to Taipei and I interact with some of the local entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, there are actually a lot of talent. There are actually a lot of young Taiwanese who are, playing with AI, doing a lot of internet-related projects. But I think what they're lacking is, or what could be better is more support. And like what you mentioned, a lot of the large corporates, especially the Taiwanese giants, can do more, right? Can start building that new direction.
Yes. Well, now I'm going to switch the gear to a more general question. I know many of you are expert in your region, and I would like to know what does it take next to create or to foster a thriving ecosystem, and how can the ecosystem connect globally? So anyone can, take the opportunity to answer this. I would like to hear your experience in sharing, or maybe you want to start?
Okay, thank you. Well, that's exactly what I will present later, so it's a good question to me. So France have innovation for a long while already, but also for a long while lacked the entrepreneurship tools or mindset ready to launch many companies on the market. We could invent, but we were publishing our innovation, but seldom transforming that into a company. It has changed drastically with what we call La French Tech, which is a French government launch initiative with a few programs to help young entrepreneurs start a company, with a few incentives instead of seed money or even Series A, again, for the government. But most importantly, it's not yet another program. It's a program that involve the entrepreneurs themselves. Either they are already investors, they're working in a large company, or start a startup 10 years ago. They're all involved in the program. How? Well, La French Tech is also a way to federate French local ecosystem. So each cities could apply to become a French tech city. So they have to fill several criteria, that we have enough investors, entrepreneurs, mentors, startups on our ecosystem, and we will all work together. If we do that, we have access to those program incentives and export globally our startup. So, and it worked very well because it's the dialogue between the entrepreneur and the government is continuous. So the program evolved to the need of those people. And it's very, very unique, I believe, to have a government listening day after day what the entrepreneurs needs, what the government can feel, but also what other private actors should feel. So far, we have much more startups than before. They export more. They are more visible. La French Tech is also like a brand. Seed money, Series A is here. We still are in the process to attract more VCs, and we still also need more talent. But so far, it's taking very well, and it's much easier to start a startup now than before because France has become a startup-friendly ecosystem. If you went to a bank 10 years ago and say, hey, I'm starting a startup, the word startup, they don't know what it is. They would say, okay, it's a very cute project. Come back when you are a real company. Now it's very different. So even that is a big step for us because we really started from far behind the US, obviously, and maybe behind Taiwan.
All right, I would echo some of those comments. I think one of the key things is you need to have innovators and groups that are could be researchers that are advancing science, that are advancing towards breakthroughs. But I think the key is you need to have incentives in place for those innovators to then put on an entrepreneur's hat and then engage the entrepreneurial ecosystem within their location. And I think one of the ways that the United States was able to do this was by passing what was called the Bayh-Dole Act, which essentially allowed academic innovators to then file patents and then get royalties that would come back to those innovators. And so any academic in the United States working at academic institution, when they have a breakthrough, they'll file the patent, but then the patent office, as soon as that patent is licensed, then royalties start coming in. Those royalties are shared with the academics who created those innovations. And so there's that type of incentive. And some institutions, those royalties will even come back to the laboratory as well, in addition to the investigators who made those basic discoveries. So I think you really need to have that type of framework in place. I think there's many places in the world where you have great innovators, but the patent system doesn't incentivize, and so you have all this great science being conducted, but nothing ever kind of spins out. So I think that's one of the critical elements, is having innovators and then incentivizing them. I think also having government support, so like as things start to advance, that the right infrastructure can be put into place and incubators and the like. I think if you look at some of the centers around the world that are actively doing this, maybe over the last 10 or 20 years, one example is in Toronto, Canada, where there's been a lot of innovation that's happening, but very few companies had been formed. And so the Ontario government put hundreds of millions, maybe it's even billions of dollars into the ecosystem in Toronto to then attract entrepreneurs and reimbursement regulatory experts and all the different people that you need along the translational path to then facilitate that process. And then made it easy for the groups who were innovating within academic institutions to then engage the business community, because often there's a big barrier between the innovators and the business world. And so you need to be able to facilitate that communication and make it really easy for those innovators to be able to take their technologies and see a path forward. I think another critical element is to have examples of success. So having people in the community who have taken basic science, let's say, or initial discoveries, and have translated that into successful companies where you have now products on the market. And these can serve as role models to show people what's possible. So I think these are some of the critical elements that are important for innovation to happen.
Thanks for sharing. Yes.
Yeah, can I jump onto that? So I'm really much influenced by the Babson Business School's definition of the open innovation ecosystem. So if I think about open innovation or startup ecosystem, I think in mind 6 elements of it. So policy, technology, market, culture, what else? HR, human resources, and finance. And I think everything of those is really important for every aspect. And then as these people talking about, like government support is also very important. But one thing that the technology startup they always get into the pitfall is that they sometimes lack a sense of market, as he referred to in the last point. So many of the technology startups came out from the universities or like people who are like kind of tech geeks. And they, of course, very much interested in technology development, as well as they also needed some finance from the venture capitalists in the early stage or seed stage. So therefore, they pretty much get too much into technology and the scientists sometimes. However, finally, they have to grow to the later stages and sell their products to the market. So they have to open their mind to the market as well. But because since they are very busy working on the R&Ds, they sometimes lose to think about that kind of sense. So in that sense, being proactively working together with venture capitalists, or especially in our country, CVC is taking a really great important role because CVC has a sense of market. So they are actively working together with them, startups, as not only as an investor, but as a mentor to how they can make their own products to the market. So that is a very important partnership between startups and corporate venture capitals.
Well, thank you. Dave, do you have something to add?
Yeah, sure. From every different ecosystem has different characteristics and nuances. So Silicon Valley started in their own way, and if you look at at least from the Southeast Asia lesson, right? There are multiple countries in the past that's tried to, build up an ecosystem by taking, by following some of the earlier models in Silicon Valley, but it didn't work, right? Those attempts failed, and where we see in the current, what I call the current cycle, the current wave. It is finally showing results, right? And it is due to several factors. One, there is bottom-up interest. So at the grassroots, there are entrepreneurs, there are founders who are interested in coming up with technology innovation, who has interesting ideas and projects that they want to pursue, right? So there's a lot of bottom-up interest. And two is top-down push from the government, right? So the governments across Southeast Asia, in their previous attempt, where they failed, they took lessons from that, and they realized that you can't just wholesale try to follow, something, that has happened in Silicon Valley, for example. You have to do it very specific to what's happening in your local market. So then what happened is, in the early, given, let's say 2012, 2013, about 5-6 years ago, what the Singapore government does is they start to promote several things, right? So besides having, besides making technology and innovation one of the top strategic agenda and priority for the country, they also set in place a lot of friendly policies, friendly laws, to promote that, to promote innovation, to promote startups. But in the same time, they realize that you need to have funding, right? You need to have capital across various stages to be willing to support all these ideas. So what the government did was they start having a matching program, right? So they basically say they want to encourage new venture capital managers. They want to establish, they want new funds to be established. So they basically have a matching program where, if you as a venture capital fund raise X amount of dollars, they will match you, right? Therefore, your fund becomes larger and you have more funding to support the entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, right? So top down, right, with governments taking a serious commitment, right, to this space, and then bottom-up interest that is, accumulating across, the grassroots. That a lot of young people who wants to innovate and wants to pursue the project, and that took at least the last 5-6 years to develop and come to where it is today. I would say today is still early days in Southeast Asia, but in terms of level of activities, it has increased a lot compared to 5 years ago.
Thank you. Now I would like to ask a question from entrepreneur or startup perspective. So we're talking about go global or connect to a different region. And I think each region or each area has their competitive edges or different resources. From a startup perspective, how can they leverage or utilize your local resource and be able to make them has a chance, improve the chance of success? Maybe start from the Europe.
Okay. So we have great incentives for either creation of your company, tax incentives, grants for very innovative startups in AI, in blockchain and others, in biotech. We have also very good, successful companies who are now great mentors of La French Tech in France. I think in France, mostly I think if you create your company in France, it will be easy to get access to those incentive and grant, easy to get access to talent and to work with universities. I think we have a strong also R&D and academic research background in France. I think something you should really consider when you go to France to do your business is you can have a great R&D hub over there. And France is also becoming also a very nice spot for exploring all Europe markets. It's a normal reflex for Taiwanese to go to UK, for instance, to speak English and to environmental finance, etc., or to Germany as well, linked to all those big industrial companies. But France is becoming really a biggest startup hub in Europe, very international, and you will meet a lot of people there who can help you. Plus, the government who is now making things easier for you in terms of visa as well. There is a new French Tech visa. It's 4-year visa. Either you are a founder, either you are an investor, or an employee from a French or whatever startup in France. So you are a young software developer. You're going to work in a French startup. You can have a 4-year visa, even with your family with you. So it's also to facilitate the coming of more and more talents. And then again, President Macron has really said that deep tech, AI, blockchain, tech for good really is a priority now for France. So we welcome any startup and talent in this field.
Okay, thank you. How about Japan?
Yeah, repeatedly, I think one of the local resources the startups has to make a good use of it is larger enterprises in our ecosystem. So as I said in my previous presentation, they're actually funding to startups. But the resources they have is not only money, but also they have data and other resources. So in Japan, like France and other countries, the government are supporting creating startups. So for technology startups, and the universities are also really proactive to create university startups. So we have had a lot of promising seed-stage tech startups. But the problems that we will be faced with is that how we can leap over the barrier of this to move them forward to the later stage to make them much more lucrative. So in that sense, we need to experience much more POCs, proof of concept kind of processes for those startups. But since our ecosystem in the very early stage still, so not very many of them has been experienced that kind of POCs yet. So in terms of POC, in this era of AI or IoT, data is very important for those startups because they have to have teaching data set to grow their own algorithm, right? And in that sense, to do some POC, larger enterprises are the best partners to work together with because they have been doing really complex and gigantic business operations. So for example, if you work together as a startup with Toyota, they have had a lot of manufacturers, factories. And then those data sets are kind of not open to public, of course. So you have to get into Toyota and ask them to share the data to grow their own algorithm to grow. So that kind of partnership is very important. And so you have to think about the larger corporation, not as only as an investor or customer, but a partner to build up your own AI and IoT systems.
Yes, thank you. You know, actually, some of my portfolio company already engaged with Toyota, Kawasaki, and also Tokyo Power. They are the largest electricity company in the world. But you know, thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the United States is that there's a lot of strengths in many different areas, and you know, some are located, let's say, Silicon Valley or in Boston or Chicago, New York. But what's interesting is that well, we have quite a diversity of resources that can be leveraged for various innovative opportunities. You still see lots of companies in the United States externalizing various aspects of their translational process. So like I was mentioning before, you have, we can do lots of clinical trials for life science-based companies in the United States, but regulatory is very difficult. And, countries like Australia have been very progressive in their regulatory strategies. You have countries like Japan that have been very progressive in their regenerative medicine regulatory strategies. And so you see these great companies that are located within the United States, and they can conduct a lot of their work there, but they're choosing to go elsewhere because there's more incentives to do so. You see companies in the United States actually going to other countries where there's better tax incentives to do manufacturing or take care of other aspects of their business. And so, to me, I think it's really all about countries really thinking about what are their strengths, and then how can you incentivize the rest of the world to then utilize those strengths and really make it a cornerstone of innovation. And I think, when you have many strengths, it's important to then, to focus so that you can almost have a brand around the country so that you can then more easily attract talent and facilitate, the innovation ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you want to say?
Yeah, maybe I'll just touch on a couple of points, and I'll just pretend that if I'm a local Taiwanese entrepreneur, right? I think what I'm going to do then is to really look at, if I'm building a company or I'm pursuing an idea, what is really the path of my growth, right? The path to growth and the path to potential success. And one classic example is to look at the entrepreneurs and in Israel, right, an ecosystem like Israel, where from day one, right, a startup in Israel, they know very well that their market is not in Israel, their market is the world, right? So from day one, when they founded a company, when they start on an idea, they know that they have to build that for global markets. Otherwise, there will be no chance of success, right? So similarly for Taiwan, right, there might be some level of domestic market for certain products, for certain services. But if I'm a local entrepreneur here, I want to go through that thought process, understand, whether it's just a domestic market or is also a global market. And then based on that, I want to find the right partner. And the partner could be a local VC, a local investor, or a local corporate, or it could be an overseas, right? It could be a global corporation, could be a global investor as well, who takes an interest in your idea and your product.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, maybe I should also mention a little bit about Taiwan government's effort. So we have been, encouraging in terms of the angel investment, and also encourage a lot of startup, more younger talent get into the entrepreneurship rather than just go to a big corporation and work. So Asian Silicon Valley Development Agency actually is fostering and promoting for those emerging technology. We have a so-called 5+2 industry. So, and for Taiwania, basically we raise the money also to do the investment on the biotech side and also on the technology, especially on AI, IoT, and we're also looking for the portfolio company globally, not just invest locally. So hopefully through the investment, we can have more direct connection through the technology or talent and working with a different region. So maybe I should open to the floor. I don't know if you any question from the floor after listening to this speech and sharing. I don't know if any question come from the floor. Please don't hesitate before we close this panel discussion. I would like to see anyone want to ask question. Okay, we do. Can we pass the microphone?
Oh, hi, my name is James from Toronto. So my question is for Professor Karp. So given kind of your background in both entrepreneurship and research, I wanted to ask, like, how do you balance the kind of both from the perspective of, let's say, academic publications and let's say patents, but also in terms of, let's say, how the mindset of your students, or like how you train the grad students for this kind of environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the can you hear? Yeah, it's okay. So I think academics, important to consider, academics are not trained, in general, academics like me, in the business world, right? So, I did my training in chemical engineering and biomedical engineering, and really no formal business training. And so one of the things that I did was, when I started my laboratory, because I had some really innovative mentors, like Bob Langer at MIT, who really kind of showed me and others, what's possible. What I decided to do was, I made a primary goal of my lab to not just publish papers, but to focus in rigorous science, but then take that rigorous science and make the end goal not the publications, but actually getting those technologies out into society. So one of the key things that I did was I recognized I don't have those business skills to make that happen. And so every 2 or 3 weeks since I started my faculty position in July of 2007, I've made a commitment to meet people in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Boston, be it patent lawyers, corporate lawyers, reimbursement regulatory experts, entrepreneurs, people in companies, and develop relationships with them. So literally, every 2 or 3 weeks, I'd be meeting someone new, going for coffee, going for lunch, and it wasn't just a one-time meeting. I was looking to develop relationships. And what that helped me to do was, as we advance projects in the lab, it's almost like we have this external advisory board that we can turn to keep projects on track towards translational goals, towards starting companies or forming patents and then licensing those patents. And then the second thing that did, in addition to being able to keep redirecting the project towards a translational goal, not just a paper, but actually getting something out into society, was that those relationships enabled me to connect with entrepreneurs, lots and lots of entrepreneurs. So once a technology is getting mature, then I have a whole bunch of entrepreneurs that I can turn to and ask, are you interested to be available? Do you know someone who's available? Because what I saw was a lot of my academic colleagues would have a technology, they'd wait until they publish their paper, they'd file their patent, and then they look for an entrepreneur. But it's all based on relationships. It's really difficult to find a great entrepreneur who will dedicate 100% of their time for several years to take that technology out of academia and bring it forward. So that's been one of the key things that I've been focused on, is really integrating within the entrepreneurial ecosystem within Boston. And in my laboratory, I bring that, what I was talking before about the filters. So the questions that I ask my students are not just about rigorous science, it's about impact. It's about, we're developing technologies. What's the threshold that we need to surpass to get everybody excited, to excite our academic colleagues, to excite industry, to excite investors, and to really think critically in every single project, what result do we need in what model to then electrify the field that will then create gravity to move these technologies out of the lab. And so I'm constantly asking these questions of the students in my lab so that they're thinking about that bar that we need to exceed, and they're not thinking about the publication as the end goal. So it's this kind of creating a culture. And the last thing that I'll mention is that what I've tried to do is populate my lab with people from various disciplines, so highly multidisciplinary and almost no overlap, very minimal overlap in the expertise of the people in the lab. So we have chemical engineers, material scientists, biologists. We had a gastrointestinal surgeon from Japan, a cardiac surgeon from Germany, a dentist, MDs. And the reason why that's important is because when people are sitting around a table and we're brainstorming, trying to overcome challenges, everybody can provide a unique perspective. Everyone has things they can contribute that nobody else around the table can contribute, and then that validates that person. Then they're more likely to go all in and put in a lot of effort to bring things forward. And so creating a multidisciplinary environment where people can really go all in, and a lateral environment as well, where we're not based on ego, we're really based on creating win-win situations for everyone involved. And I know I said the last thing, but the last thing is that I think that it's really important for people to see successful examples, and that can really incentivize the whole team. Once you have a successful example, they know it's possible. They then can make that their goal. If they don't see a successful example, then they're likely to put their goals lower in other places.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Yes.
Let me just jump into this question. So I want to dig in more to ask Jeff about this. So I think for university professors' perspective, I think HR system of the university matters as well. So basically, wherever in the globe, I think basically university professors are graded by their academic performance, thesis, as well as courses, feedback from the students. And it's not very common for Japanese universities that professors are evaluated by their outputs for the society or the commercial purposes. So what's it's like in the American universities? So given that you are very active about doing entrepreneurial activities, is that really well taken by the universities or your employers?
Yeah, I would say, so it's a great question. I've seen a lot of diversity even across the United States. There's institutions that I've visited, really top-tier institutions, like incredible, where I go and visit, and the academics there complain to me that they can't bring anything out of their lab because the patent office is too controlling. Like they don't file enough patents, and they don't they want to control the process. And so I think one part of the answer is that there's incredible diversity in the United States. There's from very good to very bad in terms of even some top tier institutions where it's tough to get things out of the lab, where people will say to me, we can't start companies. The only way to move technology out of the lab is to license the technologies to large companies, and it's it's a different type of model. And so I think it's just important when you consider the United States that there are certain institutions that do it really well. Like for example, MIT, it has incredible innovation that's happening, and one of the key reasons is because Lita Nelson led the patent office there, and she created win-win opportunities for the investigators. She let them know the process. She made it really easy for people to approach the IP office and help introduce them to entrepreneurs and others. And then Lita went and helped to establish the Stanford Tech Transfer Office, and she's kind of gone around and done that. But I think it's important to consider that there's a few really good examples in the United States, but there's also many not so good examples. And I think a lot of these things need to come into place. And what I see as one of the most critical things is what you were talking about, just kind of like the HR side of things, the patent office, making things easy for investigators to navigate through the translational process, and so not creating barriers. A lot of institutions impose barriers, and I think one of the ways maybe to help with institutions that are kind of going in the wrong direction is to bring people in. Like for example, Lita Nelson is retired now from MIT, but she's consulting for various institutions around the world in terms of how to set up a successful tech transfer office. And I think that if institutions are willing to listen to her and engage in other people like Lita, this could really fuel a lot more innovation within academic centers around the world.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, definitely. I think academic research institution play a key role in terms of fostering the ecosystem or entrepreneurship as well. I always think a great professor really need to count by not just how many paper he or she published, but how many companies he started and IPO. Okay.
One thing to add to that, so it's interesting. So my home institution is the Brigham and Women's Hospital located in Longwood Medical Area in Boston. And the Brigham is connected to Mass General Hospital through what's called Partners Healthcare. So it's kind of like this overarching group because, to provide the same services to multiple hospitals. And my academic appointment goes through Harvard Medical School. So at Partners Healthcare, what they did is they brought in Chris Coburn, who led the Cleveland Clinic Tech Transfer Office, and he came in and took over, and he made innovation among the academics as a priority. He set it as a priority. He sends around weekly newsletters of all the patents that have been filed, all the companies that have formed, all the deals that have been done. And so the people in the community then see this, and it creates this this excitement. You start to see who are the people you should go talk to if you want to innovate. What's really possible within the academic system, and it incentivizes people to work together and to really consider moving things out of the lab. So I think it's creating that culture is absolutely essential. And one of the ways to do it, where you're kind of stuck in the old methods, is you need open-mindedness, and you need people to come in from successful examples to come in and train those institutions and really how to do it.
Okay, well, time flies. We really run down to the last few minutes. And I'd like to thank all these panelists that really, truly experienced very talented panel. But I'd like to ask you to close with final thoughts on how can we connect the dots globally and leveraging and partnership together.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think Taiwan and France have very great complementarity, synergies. When I arrived here 3 years ago, we'd been told, okay, Taiwan is a manufacturing base, great for prototype, which is true, still true today. But it's so much more than that. I think great talent in AI, blockchain, I see that every day here. And we're very happy to work with some of your startups here and to have sent them to France and vice versa. So I think these are some fields not only related to manufacturing, we are booming, and I think we will see more and more Taiwanese startups abroad for sure, and they are very welcome to our market and to partner with our companies. So French Tech Taiwan is here to bridge both countries, and very happy and to discuss with any potential startup who want to go to France. Thank you.
Great to hear that.
Yeah. I think among Asian countries, each single country is really eager to make their own ecosystem. However, I think those ecosystems hasn't been connected yet. And especially for my field, like space businesses, Japanese government are really eager to open up their ecosystem Asian-wide. So they have been working heavily on a business contest called S-Booster. And they are in the third year this year. And they have been working only domestically in the past 2 years. But this year, they opened up their contest to Asian countries. So this kind of like a cross-regional platform is needed for all different industries as well. So if we did, that'll be really feasible. That'll be accelerate the connecting the dots.
Okay, great. Jeff?
I think it's all about relationships. And to me, I think the key to fueling those relationships is getting out there, making it really easy for international groups to know what your strengths are, and making it easy for them to come to your country and get exposed to exactly what they need to see. So to have the resources in place and the HR and the processes so that entrepreneurs and innovators and everybody through the translational ecosystem can navigate the strengths within that country, to know what the resources are. I think you want to make it easy for people in a country to go to other countries and learn from successful examples. And so to me, you need to have resources and policies and processes in place to facilitate relationships. And to me, that's what it's all about.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think from a Southeast Asia perspective, naturally is a large market that Taiwanese entrepreneurs should explore and consider. And that naturally ties back to then, when you're innovating, when you're building your products, think of building it beyond just for the Taiwanese market, but for a broader audience, a more global market. And Southeast Asia has a very open door policy. There are multiple points and potential partners that understand the Taiwanese market as well that you can collaborate with, and therefore help you to go into new markets and explore them in Southeast Asia.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate all your participation in this panel discussion, especially for those who are traveling so far away, all the way to Taiwan. And I also thank everybody that has heard your valuable sharing today. Let us give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Can I invite all 5 of you to have a group photo together to wrap up this morning's forum? Let's have a photo together. Okay. Please look straight ahead to center front. One more. Thumb up, please. Let's do a thumb up. All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, it's lunch hour in Taipei now, so we're going to take a short break. When we come back in the afternoon, we're going to continue with the topic, startup ecosystem, and we're going to bring in European point of view. So if your company or your product is targeting at a European market, you don't want to miss the forum. And most importantly, it's the final pitch contest this afternoon. This year, we have a total prize of $420,000 US. Which company, which product, which team is going to bring home the grand prize? Join us and find out. So don't go away, we'll be back.
The French Tech Pavilion, we count on you.
Canada is very excited to be participating at InnoVEX again this year, InnoVEX 2019.
5월 29일부터 31일까지 대만 TWDC 1관에서 열리는 InnoVEX 한국관에 여러분들의 많은 참여를 부탁드리겠습니다.
Hi, my name is Mihalina. I'm from the Polish Investment and Trade Agency. We are bringing some innovative startups to come to InnoVEX.
At the Holland Startup Lounge of the InnoVEX, you will meet innovative startups with creative solutions.
Come visit us at the Philippines Slingshot Startup Pavilion at InnoVEX 2019.